Welcome to Moving Forward, conversations on culture, identity, healing, and hope. I'm your host, Linda Anderson, and I created this podcast as a space for real, heartfelt conversations with people who are reflecting, evolving, and boldly stepping into what's next. This podcast was born out of my own journey through seasons of loss, transition, and transformation, and my belief that healing happens when we come together to share our stories. My hope is that these conversations will inspire you to pause, reflect, and find courage as you move forward in your own life. Today's episode feels like a full circle moment for me. My guest is someone I've known since elementary school. We even served together on our 8th grade student council. Today, I'm honored to welcome Gus Perna. Gus is a retired 4-star general to the United States Army, where he served 38 years with distinction, guided by a deep sense of purpose, loyalty, and devotion to mission and people. Defending the Constitution is woven into his DNA, and at the heart of his leadership is character. And I can definitely say that. He's always doing right, holding himself accountable, and taking care of his people. He has taken his skills into a new arena as the founder and CEO of Perna Consulting, where he focuses on executive leadership, change management, and problem solving for C-suites, while also serving on several corporate boards across industries from technology to health to defense. His belief in the power of a clear why, and to the listeners that are listening that know me, why is important. So his belief in the power of a clear why, coupled with mission, people, and mentorship, is helping organizations move from evolutionary to revolutionary. In our conversation, we'll talk about Gus's journey from those early student council days to Army leadership to the COVID-19 responses and into his current work shaping the future of organizations and leaders. I am so honored, proud, and grateful to welcome my longtime friend, General Gus Perna, to this podcast. Welcome, Gus. Thanks for being here.
Linda, it's really my pleasure. And when you reached out through Mark Coombs, who is still one of my great friends, it was just an easy yes. So I'm really enjoyed talking to you and brought back a lot of memories. And thanks for reaching out to me. It's an honor.
So what you just said actually goes back to, and what I'd like to talk about first is you and I do go back all the way to elementary. You reminded me it was 3rd grade where you started at the school that I was, and we even served on our 8th grade student council together. When you think about those early years, do you see the beginnings of your leadership style taking place?
That's an interesting point, but truth in lending, I don't think so. As I reflect back to those days, both in grammar school and high school, I was just trying to survive. An average athlete, average student, and somebody who, really wanted to fit in, as a friend and, to whatever groups that we had back then to assimilate into. So I would love to tell you I had this urge and this DNA, connection to taking on a leadership role, but no way. I think I was trying to remember why I actually did that. And I think we, it was like a dare, Paul Cristiano and I, it was a dare to go do something, so I'd love to tell you there was a connection, but no. And truthfully, as I reflected on it since we talked, one of my big lessons learned is I spent a lot of time thinking about me in those days. And it quite frankly, it wasn't until I went to military school in college and then into the Army that I really started to shift to make it something bigger than me. And that's where a lot of things just became noticeable in my life change of life, I guess.
So
Um,
the title of this podcast is moving forward, and you're definitely dipping into that right away. I mean, you moved forward, but back, in your younger years, I'm sure there were mentors, role models. Can you name any, or who did spark your sense of purpose from to move forward?
well, truthfully, I came from, a very great family. My dad and my mother were examples to me, and and they both came from family lineages that were impressive. My mother's father was a vice admiral, which is a three-star admiral. Graduated from the academy and served in World War II, and rose through the ranks. And then my father and his three brothers and brother-in-law, are the children of people who came over from Italy, but yet they all served. Four of them served in World War II, and one in Korea. And they were always just, quite frankly, my admiration for all of them was just, I always just remembered wanting to sit with them at the family dinners and listen to the stories. And so I had a good family background. It wasn't some, as we were talking earlier, sometimes I learned things the hard way. And sometimes I learned it because I was a little bit smarter than the average bear. My dad used to say, and I'll talk more about that, but one thing he used to say to me, he says, Gus, everybody needs a pat on the back. Sometimes it's high and sometimes it's low. You just got to know when to do it, right? And so I'll remember that for the rest of my life. Of course, I've used it. So, I was lucky. I had a good family. I had great siblings, and I had some good friends. And you remember them all: Mark Coombs, Jerry Valletta, Paul Cristiano, Rob Enholm, and so they were people who I trusted and learned from. So.
Mhm. And again, as a listen, people that are listening, it's again this moving forward. I mean, you're talking about your culture, your identity, and then just hope and moving forward. And I appreciate it too, sharing all that and definitely bringing us back. But we've both moved forward. You've definitely moved forward. So on that note, let me bring you more into that, where you said that defending the Constitution is in the fabric of your DNA. But what did that look like in practice across nearly 4 decades in uniform?
So if I could start a little bit to back up a little bit,
Mhm.
as I said, and I'm self-reporting, um, I made decisions, or I thought I made decisions in life, albeit very young decisions, right, about how it would impact me. What did people think? Should I go out for the football team? Should I, hang out with this group or do this or do that? In just selfish reflection, it was all about me. And I got lucky in that uh, I turned the corner somewhere after my first year of college, where I went locally, and I ended up at military school. And things started changing for me, right? It was just like it was meant to be, right? It was where I belonged. Because you can believe that leaders are born, or you can believe that there's something inside of you that makes you a good leader. But I think it's born, something inside of you, and learned. The combination of things. And I just got very lucky in that, where I had a good foundation, but yet it wasn't focused. And when I went to military school, what I started to learn were things like everything you should do should be about, what's best for the unit and best for the people in the unit, not you. Everything ought to be about, the team. My father used to have this sign in his office, that said, "A group of people can accomplish anything if nobody's worried about who gets the credit."
Mm.
And when he passed away 28 years ago, I took that sign and I put it it was always in my office, right? Because I wanted to be reminded of, how important that was. Again, not about me. And then it was, I would just tell you every single thing I did, what I learned when I went to military school, when I made that leap, is it's okay. Take chances, take risk, go do something new, right? I just saw a quote the other day. Have the courage to learn. What was it? Have the courage to do something new and maybe learn what not to do,
Mm.
something like that. And I'm paraphrasing it, but I really garnered that, right? I really believed in it. And all those experiences that just layered on themselves through military school, through all my assignments, rising through the ranks, deploying to combat, all those things is what, just made my, beliefs, really strong. And I'll get to your question.
That's okay.
The one other thing that I really grasped, which I was not very good at, and I have some, I don't know if they're regrets, but if I could correct them, if I can go back in time, I would correct a few things.
Mm.
I was not so good at taking responsibility and accountability, as a young boy, man, teenager, whatever the words are. And, being in this culture of thinking about other people, about the unit, about I just gained this self view of myself that I was always going to be responsible and I was always going to be accountable. And that's not how that was not where I was early on. So it was the combination of all that, right? Experience, focusing on a team, being responsible, not focused on me, right? That drew me to something higher. And I'm a big purpose, to find purpose in life, to find purpose in the mission, to find purpose in your job, right? And then figure out what and how to do things. And so my purpose became the Constitution, right? And in its simplest form, in its words, I just believed that that was the onus for our national security, our way of life. And I just believe with all my heart, support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And that drove me. That drove me to, be the best at what I was doing when I was doing it. That drove me to take care of people who, I was responsible for. That drove me to make sure I was always responsible. If it was my fault, it was my fault. To, and even I practiced that as a 4-star. But
Mhm.
I those were all things I learned, and it was because of that focus, to the Constitution. It just it lit me up, and it drove me then, and it drives me now, and I'm unapologetic about it. I'll find myself in conversations because I'll be out and around. Susan and I will be someplace and whatever, and somebody will realize who I am and don't want to get into these, really deep conversations, and I won't do that. I did what I did because I believed in it, and I'm not going to defend it over.
I'm sure the listeners are hearing, like I'm hearing too, that your character is very strong, and that is so what's at the heart of your leadership. You want to do what's right, being accountable, and also taking care of people. But my wonder is, can you share a moment when living those values? Because I know listeners hear it and I hear it, but when living those values, when it wasn't easy, but was essential.
Yeah, I mean, there's two sides to that. It's personal and professional. And, I've been blessed that I met Susan and she's been a rock for me, right? Because, she didn't even know I was in the Army when I asked her to marry me. I did, when I finished school at Valley Forge, it's a unique program. I got commissioned as a second lieutenant. Normally you get commissioned when you're a senior at a university or West Point. But I was in a special program and I got commissioned as a sophomore. So I went into the National Guard for 2 years while I was finishing school. So I actually did 2 years in National Guard and 38 years of active duty. and and I had met Susan, and she didn't know I was in the Army, and so I asked her. I had to go away. I had to report to active duty, and so I said, "Hey, I got to report to active duty, and I'd really like you to go with me. But if we're going to go with me, we got to get married."
Mhm.
And she said yes. I got really lucky. I mean, she had no clue, none. I mean, I had, believe it or not, I had pretty thick hair, so mustache and everything. And, she just, was not even in her cycle. And I got lucky and she went. Well, that sacrifice that she made, she got up and left, right? Her family, and everything to come with me, I was never going to let that down. Never, never. Right. So, it became a focal point to me, in the importance of that. And as you know, right, I mean, uh, marriage is always about learning and adjusting
Mhm.
and, you know, taking the high ground with each other, right? It's a partnership if it's going to be successful. And there's some, you got to be careful, right? So that was number one. Personally, my focus was to her and the boys. As I said earlier in the conversation, I wasn't home a lot, quite frankly. And so when I came home, I had to make sure I was focused on them. And not perfectly, to be honest with you, but I worked hard at it.
Mhm.
But so professionally, where your question is, in the Army, what happens is you start out as a lieutenant and you're usually assigned 40 soldiers. And then, you become a captain and you get somewhere between 300 and 1,000 soldiers working for you. I happen to have about 1,000. Then when you're a battalion commander, you have a different structure of soldiers, and it's about 700 to 1,200 soldiers, give or take. And then you become brigade commander, and it's about 5,000 to 7,000. And then my last job in the Army as a four-star was 190,000 people. So my belief was my mission, right? That my purpose was support and defend the Constitution. Then the mission that I was assigned at whatever rank it was, and then it was about the people who were, I was responsible and accountable for. And I learned so much. I learned how to communicate. I learned how to, give orders, but listen. I learned how to hold people, myself accountable, responsible and accountable. I learned how to hold them responsible and accountable. I learned how to tell people they weren't doing well, right? Because it is about, what we do is not, it's not unicorns and cotton candy and, it's hard. It can be really hard. So you need people to, be of high character and highly trained and highly dedicated, right? You can't, it's not something you do part-time, mentally or physically. So you have to learn how to say good and bad. And then the responsibility, and I'll just share with you, I've been to, as a young captain, I went to Somalia. I spent 6 months in Somalia, and that was a tough tour. A lot going on down there, and there was times I did not think the leadership was very good, and it was very dangerous. But I was so focused on it, I just did what I was supposed to do, and then when I got home, I was at my time was up, so I was going to resign. And Susan said, "I'll do whatever you want to do." Now, luckily, uh, luckily, my dad said, "Hey, I'm going to support you, but it's always best if you don't make a decision based on a moment in time." And so he says, I thought you like what you do. I thought you like leading. I thought you liked being with soldiers. I thought you liked deploying. And I said, well, I do. But I said the leadership was not very good. And he says, well, okay, so it looks like you just gave yourself a task. And I said, what's that? He says, well, you need to be the leader that you want to respect. And so to that end, yeah. No, no kidding. Thanks, Dad. But so my point to that is I went to Somalia. Then, I was away for a year in Saudi Arabia without Susan and the boys. I got home. I was home less than a week, and I got a phone call to go to Bosnia for a year. Right. And so I had to, come home and tell Susan I'm going away for a year. And I went to Bosnia. So I was away for 1 year. I come home and I went to Bosnia. And Bosnia had moments, it wasn't this constant danger. And so I could focus more on what we were doing and in taking care of people. But it really lifted me above myself, right? Because there was a moment I was feeling pretty sorry for myself. What do you mean? I just got home,
Mhm.
and but the mission required, right, to deploy and be away and focus on that because, I had faith in our leaders that they thought being in Bosnia was an important task to the end of supporting the Constitution. I just believed it. I believed it bigger than me. And then, I've deployed as a battalion commander. I was in the invasion to Iraq, right? So I took 700 soldiers who crossed the border in Kuwait, and we went all the way up to Baghdad. Then we went up to Mosul, to Tikrit. Then we went to the Iranian border. Then we came back to north of Baghdad, Balad, and they were my responsibility.
Mhm.
But you don't do those things. You don't do those things because, hey, I got a call. Here's our new mission, and we all get on a plane and we go. You got to be thinking about that from the moment you're responsible. So, we developed a training program. I held people accountable to it. I wouldn't let them take the easy way out. We did a lot of redos, right? And we did it over and over and over and over until we got it right. And then we went and did it, and a lot of people don't know this, but in my opinion, the best leaders aren't micromanagers. The best leaders are the ones that provide a vision, tell people what's critical to do, train them to do it, hold them accountable. Because when we went to Iraq in that invasion, I went forward and I had to put young 21-year-old, 22, 23, 19-year-old people in charge of convoys that rolled all those places, because 700 people times X amount of vehicles times, it's not like driving from here to, from Alabama to New Jersey. I mean, there's people trying to hurt you.
Yeah.
And so, the responsibility and accountability to leading them started way before we got the call to go, right?
Mm.
And you can take that responsibility and accountability and hold yourself to that end, or you can think this is all about you and not do all that stuff. And I see that happen. It's just not the path I was on. 2 years later, I get home from that thing in less than, well, 18 months later, I'm back in Iraq. I'm in Baghdad and I got 7,000 soldiers.
Wow.
And so, I'm sending out, I think we did, I can't do the math in public,
That's
but,
okay.
I was sending out 30, 40, 50 convoys a night,
Wow.
right? All over Iraq. And there was more IEDs and ambushes,
Mm.
going off every night on those roads, so I held them accountable to a standard. We put in new processes. I went and checked them. I rode with them at night. I would go down and check a rehearsal, and then right before we go out, I'd tell one of the soldiers, I said, "Okay, you're not going tonight. I'll take your spot." Right? But I went to the rehearsal. I did all the stuff, and then I would take somebody out, and I would jump in the truck and ride with, I'd give somebody a break, and I would ride with the convoy just to make sure everything was going the way they were going, right? And
Mm.
because I was responsible and accountable to that end. You know what I'm most proud about, Linda?
What?
I know
What?
you weren't asking me this,
Yeah.
but I went to those two deployments in very tough times, and I lost nobody.
Good.
We lost nobody, and casualties were high in those time
Hmm.
periods. And I think it's because of the standards, the discipline, the
Hmm.
training, the example, by the whole team. It really, I mean, I think about that all the time, and I get, and people don't care, but
That's good.
it's really funny because we do this thing, and our wives play a big role with us, right? Because what's our job? We get up and deploy with soldiers. Well, we leave families home, right? When I went to Somalia, when I went to Bosnia, when I went to Iraq 3 times, families stay home, right? And so Susan takes up a role of getting to know these families, right? Investing time, going to the hospital when they have children, checking on them, making sure everything's all right, blah blah blah, right? Helping out with the kids, etc. Well, inevitably, what would happen is people would not like working for me,
Mm.
because it was about standards and discipline, and we're redoing
Mhm.
it, and I'm going to hold you accountable, and at the end of the day, I always treated people right, but didn't mean I wasn't, I didn't tell people what I thought. But also, what would happen in this phenomenon of our tenure at each location, it started out with, well, we don't like your husband, and now we get Christmas cards every year from people,
Uh,
and we get phone calls, and I get people calling me up inviting me for promotions, and we get updates on children and grandchildren and all these things. We have people stopping by the house now that are crossing country to the next assignment because they remember me and Susan, right? And so
And that character, like I said in a couple questions or comments before, is your character. But you've just taken us through a great background of all your experiences in the Army. So you then had to step into another role as Chief Operating Officer for the federal COVID-19 response, which was unprecedented. And we just heard about all your Army experience, and there's a lot. But how did it prepare you for the urgency and complexity of that particular mission?
okay, so two point a point, and then some background, and then into that, right?
Sure.
One, as I said earlier, I'd love to tell you I was born this leader. No, I had something in me. Yes, it's where I belong, but it was the experiences over time that really enabled me to eventually take that job, right? It was learning new things about leadership, communication, planning, being a teammate, being building a team, right? Taking responsibility and accountability. It was all, it's just this repetition, you're always in the gauntlet, and I learned so much, and many people in the Army, would tell you the same thing, right? It's just a factory for, you know, leadership, and but you have to invest in it and be willing to learn. So that's number one. The experiences made me a better person, a better leader, right? As I self-reported, not very good in the beginning. The second thing is we promote people based on potential. We It's not about what you did. What you did get you to the table, but then it's an assessment of what we think your potential is. And so every job you're at, you have to do it, right? You get paid to do your job, but you don't get moved to the next job unless we really think you can do it. You have the potential. And we're always grading people on potential, but you move up or you move out. Well, every time I moved up, I went from 700 people to 7,000 people to, 5,000 was a one-star job. Then, I was the operations officer for this, 190,000 man organization. Then I'm doing the policy and the strategy for the entire Army. Then I'm doing, all the logistics, sustainment, and maintenance for the entire Army all over the world. So, I built all this, for lack of a better term, momentum, experience, right? Inner instincts to doing logistics, sustainment, and maintenance, right? I've done it on the battlefield, I've done it in peacetime, and I've done it at all levels. And so all that, was, part of my DNA. So that's to set the situation. When you get selected for 4 stars, it's usually a 3-year tour. at the end of my 3 years, I was getting ready to retire, and the Army said, "No, not so fast. You're staying another year. We like what you're doing. We're going through some stuff. We want you to stay another year." So I stayed 4 years. I was actually at 3 years and 11 months, 30 days away from retiring,
Mm.
and I get the call from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And he just said, "Hey, we're putting together this team. It's going to be a combination of Health and Human Services and a combination of Department of Defense. And we want you to be the co-leader or chief operating officer. And HHS will put the scientist in, and he'll be a co-leader and the lead scientist. And we want you to do that." They said, he said, "We know you're retiring. You can retire, and you can, be a contractor and charge us money."
Okay.
And I said, "No, I won't retire. This is too important." I actually believed and then he says, "I need you to think about it because we don't know what's happening. We don't know if this is a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year thing. I need you to think about it before you answer." And my response was, "Nope, I'm in." Did not need time to think about it, and I'm not going to retire. I'm going to stay a 4-star general, which is a whole different conversation about pay, etc. But I'm going to stay as a 4-star general because I'll have better maneuverability, in what I'm doing. And he says, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "What about Sue?" And I said, "Sue will be all for it." Of course, I didn't ask her, but that's how she operated, right? She was about supporting, right? She believed in it too. And I literally got off the phone from him and I walked outside and Sue was Sue was there and she had a cup of coffee and she had one for me and she goes, "Hey, you really want to do this?" I said, "Absolutely." And she goes, "Okay, just give me the timeline. I'll figure out how to move us." Because I left. That was a
Mhm.
Saturday morning. I finished up my old job for a week, and then I flew up to the Pentagon on a Monday, and I didn't come back for 18 months or whatever the time was.
Wow.
And we were in the Rose Garden by Friday. And so I know that wasn't what you asked me,
No.
but the bottom line is it was my experiences. It was my personal and professional growth as a person and a leader. And it was understanding that I thought this was so important to our national security, and I know this is not going to maybe we were losing a lot of people, as you remember, right? And it's
Mhm.
personal. Everybody lost somebody that they know that was special. But for me, it was about the nation, right? Because what was going to happen if road networks shut down because trucks can't deliver food? What was going to happen if electrical companies couldn't operate because people were sick? What was going to happen if ports and airfields couldn't operate? What was going to happen if hospitals, what was the far right extreme to what we didn't know?
Mhm.
Right? And what would that mean for the country? Right? I thought it was a national security risk. And so that's why it was a no-brainer for me. And that's why I just did it, right? I just buckled up and went. And then, I was afforded a few things. One, I because nobody really knew what we were going to do, I was able to define the purpose, literally get on the whiteboard and define it, and which was safe and effective vaccines for the American people as soon as possible. And of course, it was approved by the chairman and the SecDef and the president. But then that was one. Then I was the president, both presidents. I served both presidents,
Mhm.
President Trump and President Biden. They both gave me priority. They both gave me resources, and they both gave me access. And I briefed them both, probably weekly, every 10 days. And they were excellent. They were excellent in this crisis, in supporting the mission, right? We couldn't have done it. And we're the greatest country in the world. We have the greatest scientists. I got so much support, right? We have the greatest industry leaders. And so my job was to corral all this capability and capacity because I had priority and I had support. I had a defined purpose. And once the scientists picked the vaccines, then it was about doing what I've done my whole life, managing the supply chain, establishing manufacturing, bringing in equipment from all over the world, setting up the distribution network, setting up the system to track it, making sure we had all the needles and syringes, and then making sure people had access to it, right? And, I say that like it was really easy, but it was the hardest I've ever worked. It was 20-hour days, 7 days a week. But I had a great team that I was able to put together, and great support. And so here
So,
we are.
Gus, I want to, first thing, I have to bring some humor into this just for a little bit and to the listeners. So, Gus and I actually took Algebra 2 together in, I think it was our junior, senior year. Probably our senior year. I don't remember.
Sophomore year, I think.
Sophomore, okay. So I remember sitting, so I'm listening to Gus and I'm picturing him at this whiteboard with all these people and even going back all the way to Algebra 2. And as you keep, and I'm going back to the topic of this podcast, moving forward. You constantly moved forward with so many different things that you've experienced too, but you didn't let it stop. You just kept going. And, with your identity changing and then because my next question though is really so during that time period what gave you hope really during such a challenging and uncertain time for our country.
Yeah, so to the listeners, what Linda's not telling you is that I failed Algebra 2 like twice and ended up in summer school twice, right? I just didn't have a brain for it. It was just not there. Now I eventually passed, and just for the record, I have graduated military school and college with honors. So I don't, this don't but it took a little focus to get
Well,
me
can I
to
just bring you back to a memory of that too, real quick for the listeners? Another humor, we got to add some humor here is I was captain of what's called sports night, and I was failing that class also. But in order to stay as captain, I had to pass. So the teacher passed me. So we'll just add that
Well,
humor.
and you crushed sports night, which was a big deal.
There we
But
go.
I didn't. But I recovered well, right?
You did.
If anything, I am determined, and I
Yes.
have resiliency.
Yeah.
And I do figure out how to let things go so I can move forward. I don't, as I self-reported earlier, I've made mistakes, or I wasn't the person I wanted to be.
Mm,
Um, but I took responsibility and accountability as much as I could, and I moved forward, right? I can't look backwards.
no.
I think it was just, damn it, I don't have it. I have it on my desk. I put it in the safe. Um, you know, we couldn't fail, period. Failure was not an option, Linda. It was not an option. And I know it's clichéic and it comes out of the movie Apollo 13. Failure is not an option. I'm not sure if it was a line then or not, but for me, it was not an option. Right. And I just never thought about failure. I get asked this all the time when I go speak. I get invited to go speak, and as you kindly introduced me, I talk leadership and problem solving, team building, etc. And I always get asked that. And you know what? Not one time did I ever think we were going to fail. No. I had lots of people come in my office saying, "Sir, we're not going to be able to do that. Sir, we can't. Sir, we can't. Sir, we can't." And I just say, "Get out. Come back when you have a solution."
Mm,
Right? Tell me what you need. Do you need resources? Do you need priority? I need you to think differently, right? And I had amazing people that worked for me, and they went and solved problems, and they came back in and, nailed it. But, it was, but the failure was not an option.
mm.
We mentally, if I had worked that hard when I was in high school, I don't know what I would have ended up as. I mean, it's funny because I was staying in what we call guest quarters, and I didn't have a whiteboard. So I was going home at night, and I would go into the bathroom where there was panels, like ceramic tiles, and I would start drawing because I have to see things. I'm a very visual person. I can't I can read, but then I got to write it down, and connect 1 + 1, and I have all these drawings of my thoughts, and I would go into that bathroom and I would write all night with a dry erase marker,
Mm.
so I can think through the problems. Like, how do we decide? It's a policy decision about who gets the vaccine first. Elderly, those that are sick, professionals, whatever. That's a policy decision. That didn't matter to me. What was my thing is we knew that we were manufacturing everything from scratch, and so when I sent the vaccine out the first week, we only had 5 million doses. Well, the next week I had 10. Following week I had 20. Following week I had 100. Whatever it was, it just kept escalating up. And we knew that, right? We knew we were going to have to manage that. What I didn't know was where was it going to go? Like, we're going to send it all to one state and let one state, that again, a policy decision. But sitting in that bathroom, we had to figure out to make recommendations, right? And the recommendation we came up with was approved, right? We took the census, we took age limits from 18 and higher, and that was the population of the state. And then whatever vaccine was available that week, every state got a percentage based on their population. So there would be no, nothing political, nothing, favoritism, etc. And we delivered to that end, right? But we had to think through that. We had to come up with that math problem ourselves to make the recommendation. Came in very handy to me because it came in very handy. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. So, Gus, you are now retired, but you're not really retired. I always say that because you are applying your leadership skills that you have so developed over so many years, and you're consulting and also board on serving boards. And you work with organizations in technology, in sports, entertainment, health, and also in defense. But what excites you about contributing to such diverse industries?
So again, I'm going to go backwards to go forwards.
Okay.
If you ask me in general, how did I spend my time while I was in the Army? I would spend 51% of my time on, the mission, training, executing, and 49% coaching, teaching, mentoring people to be better, to surpass me, take over from me, and go take the unit to the next higher level. To me, that was my biggest joy. When I see people that work for me that are getting promoted and taking over jobs that I did, and now they're doing them, and now they're leading the Army. I love that. I love that. I mean, that's my favorite thing, right? I mean, I got a nice table downstairs that Susan had made, and I got medals in it, and I got coins of recognition, and I got a lot of nice accolades, but I love when I see these guys and gals get promoted. Means it's probably like you and students, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and them being successful. That is everything to me. And so what I enjoy the most of the three things I do is speaking, because
Mm.
I just love going in, connecting with the audience, based on what they want me to talk about: leadership, change management, problem solving, etc. I'm just blessed. I connect with them. I'm comfortable talking to them. I think I'm patting myself on the back, but it's well received. I get calls, to do leadership seminars and just meet with leaders and the rank and file. And you know what I believe? I believe that every time I do that, I've touched somebody,
Mm.
and I've made them a little bit better, whether it's because of hope, because they see themselves in me, because they say, well, he can do it, I can do it.
Mhm.
He barely has English under control. So if he can do this, I can go do it. So that's what I really love doing. But when I do consulting and when I sit on a board, I go right back to my foundation. What is my purpose? What is the purpose of the company? Okay, now once we have that defined, then I can coach, teach, and mentor on what and how to do things. How do you define, the 3 to 4 5 what's, and then how do you let people go do jobs without micromanaging? So it comes natural to me. I've been blessed. I've learned from incredible leaders. I've had great peer groups. I've had great family support, and now I just like doing what I'm doing,
So
and I
here,
live on a lake.
so here's some wonders too, but in your view, we'll see how you want to answer this, is what are the biggest challenges facing today's leaders and how can they rise to meet them?
Well, first of all, audio has to match video, right? Leadership can't be done behind your desk or through an email or a text,
Mm.
right? Those are tools to enable, but you have to be out. People need to see you. You have to spend time defining your purpose and your vision, and you have to go be involved in the process and the standards and the accountability. It's just the way we operate. I mean, in the Army, one of the greatest compliments you can get is, when you're out checking on soldiers, if they can recognize your voice in the dark,
Mm.
that means you've been doing your job,
Mm.
right? Because you've been checking on them, when you're supposed to be sleeping, right? And when they're most vulnerable from attack, you're out there, you're with them, you're in the foxhole, you're doing that, right? And there's a trouble spot, you're with them. So audio and video have to match. It can't be about dollars. It
Mm.
just can't be. And I think, that's the biggest thing I see. First of all, they're not singularly driven under a purpose. Firemen, policemen, teachers, school administration, soldiers, right? Hospital, they're driven for something higher. Most of society is not. Just
Mm.
my personal observation.
Mhm.
And that's not a bad thing. I mean, we're the greatest country in the world because, the way we do things, within in the free market. But but I think that's the number one thing, right? It's gotta be bigger than you. And when you're in charge, you gotta lead by example. And it's hard. And so I would say that. The second thing is, and I am not, kudos to you and your profession and my dad's profession. I am not an educator. I did my best to coach, train, and mentor, but we just owe so much to our teachers and the administration that ran those organizations, right? But we also need, families to be responsible. It's got to be this collaborative team approach to, helping our youth grow, be responsible, be accountable, learn, have goals, right? Go serve something bigger than themselves. It can't be, FaceTime I'm not even trained enough to tell you, Facebook or TikTok or I don't even know, right? I mean, I don't even know. But it can't be telling somebody to do something behind their back on a text message or being a bully or thinking you're important because you get this many clicks. I mean, that's freaking ridiculous.
Mm.
Life is not about clicks.
Mm.
Life life
Ugh.
life is great, but it can be hard, and you got to go face it, right? Which brings me to my last thing. You just got to be willing to work for what you want. I mean, we have too much false expectations that everybody's going to grow up to be a multimillionaire, right? And everybody's going to have these, great big giant parties and weddings and all this crap. I just coach people to, be happy. And happy is not defined by some status or dollar amount, but what you go do, right? And who you go do it with, right? I mean, I would not have become a four-star general if it wasn't for Susan. That's a fact.
Mm.
And the support of the boys, right? And I would not have become a four-star. I mean, I would not have become a four-star general and did that if all I was worried about was money. Because trust me, we didn't get paid a lot of money. And I was not going to, become a four-star general if I was worried every time I got deployed that something might happen to me. I had to focus on the bigger mission. And I don't want to oversimplify it because there's a lot of kids doing that. I just think there's a good number of them who aren't. And we just got to grab a hold of that, right? And at the end of the day, and it's something I learned. I didn't do it well starting out, so I have no business grading people, because they're young. But responsibility and accountability goes a long way. And so, you know,
Yeah, yeah. I'm being quiet at the moment because you've hit a lot of great nerves. And again, being in education myself, you just brought actually tears a little bit to me in a major positive way. I appreciate everything you just said about with kids and moving them forward. And I'm hoping the youth hear you and are listening too. So I'm going to kind of start wrapping up a little bit, but when you do reflect on your life, and you've done so much with being a general, a consultant, and also from our school days, what do you most want to be remembered for?
the people I helped to go do something bigger than themselves.
Mm.
I want to I think I actually think about this, right? And I've done I think I've done some I think it wasn't wasted. But I want people to remember me because I influenced them somehow, some way, you know. So
Well, you
if that
definitely have
happens, then I'm in
influenced
a good
me on
place.
this podcast. Oh my goodness. And we said, I mean, I've known Gus from our younger days, but to hear your life journey has been so inspiring to me. So I want to say the final question, and then I have a couple others, but uh, what gives you the most hope as you look at the future right now of our nation and our communities and the next generation of leaders?
Hey, anything is possible. I believe that with all my heart. I don't start off from we can't get this done. I always believe it can get done. And it's driven me, and it's just I believe it's possible. And time moves. What's happening today is going to change, right? But if you allow it to surround you and beat you down, then that's what's going to happen. And I'm not a Pollyanna. Trust me, I've been in some bad situations, and,
Mhm.
and you just got to say, crap. We better fricking dig in or something. It's not easy. Life is not easy. And it's really hard if you're stupid, or it's hard if you don't care, or if it's hard that you're letting somebody else do things for you. But and not to beat the dead horse, but it's about taking responsibility and accountability and moving out. And I had somebody tell me once, he says, "Sir, you're looking down." I said, "Yeah, well, we're doing this, we're doing that." He goes, "Sir, we're just going to do one thing at a time. We'll get your whole list done." I was a junior officer. He says, "Sir, I'm going to help you. We're going to get one thing done at a time, and we'll knock out this whole list." And I remembered that happened it happened in Somalia. And it was a chief warrant officer named Chief Perry. And he said, "Sir, we got this one thing at a time." Right. And I remembered that my whole life. And so I think there's hope. And I don't believe that, I just don't get me started on well, I'm not going to talk about all that
No.
media and etc. Just there's hope. Believe in yourself and move out.
So, to our listeners, to Gus, I have the script in front of me, but I'm going to speak from my heart that it has been such a privilege to sit down with this person and well, you can't see, but hearing that I've been friends with since elementary school. That I'm sitting here thinking, gosh, going all the way back then, and here I am with this Perna, General Perna, who, his journey through everything he shared with us. He is a true leader. It's not about rank or titles, as he said, but it's about his character, our character, people's character, your accountability, and also, and I hope you all heard it, his caring for people. While he did carry out so many missions, I'm going to listen to this over and over again because it's really filled my head. So, from nearly serving 4 decades in the Army to leading through the challenges of the COVID response, to his current work guiding organizations and across industry, Gus has shown how purpose, and he said that a couple times, and mentorship can transform both individuals and institutions. And I hope listeners understanding that. But Gus, we have to have a little fun here. I want to bring it full circle just for a couple questions. Quick, lighthearted questions about when we were back in our student council days. So let me just tell the listeners too. On Gus and my yearbook, eighth grade yearbook, on the front cover is a silhouette of 4 people, of which one is myself, Gus, and then our president, and I believe she was the vice president. Yes, are on the front page of the silhouette. So again, as student council, so Gus, if you could think back to that, then our elementary, our eighth grade student council, either one, what's one funny or unforgettable memory that comes to mind? And I know there's many, but if you could think of one.
Uh, yeah, here's what what I do love is the fact that you called Mark Coombs, Mark Coombs called me, and here you and I are talking,
Right.
and it's like we were at the Camp Bernie dance in sixth grade,
There you go.
right?
Yep.
Or we were at D'Onofrio's party on Hill Street. I remember it like it was yesterday.
Yep. Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for that. With that said, I was I was not a confident. I was, best thing that happened to me was joining the army, and the second best thing was getting married to Susan
Yeah.
and the boys. Those days I just was. I don't
Mhm.
know. I just wasn't, it's, I said, I know you want to make this a little bit humorous.
Oh, that's
We can
fine.
talk
That's
about getting
good.
caught drinking
Yeah.
in eighth grade. Me,
No,
right?
that's okay.
Me, that was not a good,
No.
event.
We do have our stories. And I think the message really is here's 2 people that started their journey together, and then our paths went different ways, and what we learned, and hearing you talk about accountability, and just the character that you have. And you keep saying that you weren't great back then or whatever, but you really were. I don't think you really knew it at the time. And then getting more experience, it obviously all came out. So on that
Right.
note, I want to ask you, who was one of your greatest teachers outside of the military? Can you think of anybody, even a teacher that you admired?
Well, I remember my grade school ones, and Miss Rumsey was, I think, sixth
Mm,
grade,
hmm.
and Miss Devaney, if I'm saying her name right, was
Yeah.
seventh grade.
All right.
And Miss Rostelli.
Yes.
They didn't pull punches, And then Mr. Stepanian,
Mm,
right? I mean, he caught me one time. He sat me down and said, "Hey, that's not way to go forward in life." And I'll never
mm,
forget that
mm,
talk.
mm,
And again, that influenced me.
mm.
Um, you know, and then, as you know, I played football, and I learned a lot about being a team player and a teammate, and I that was helpful to me. But I just what I love, and I told you I self-report. I don't do Facebook. I don't do any of
Right.
that stuff. But when somebody like Mark Coombs or Terry Koff sends me photos of people getting together, whether it's the 4th of July or whatever, I love that. It's really, I thought we grew up in a Norman Rockwell community,
Yes, we did.
despite our, whatever we might remember, good
Yeah.
or bad.
Well, despite our choices that we made, because we make them
Yes,
as young
better
people.
said,
Yes.
better said.
I want to go back to the 4 teachers you mentioned, though, Gus, and that is they were very strong people. And you talked about Mr. Stepanian, the moving forward, and there you go. Little did we know certain seeds, and those that are listening that know me, I talk about seeds being planted, and the seeds grew in your mind. They were there.
Yeah.
and they just kept moving. So, last question, fun one. If you could go back and give your 13-year-old Gus, that's when we were in student council, a piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, it would be, don't make excuses.
Mm,
Take responsibility and be accountable to things.
mhm, mhm,
If you're not meeting people, it's because you are deciding not to do it. If you're not standing up for what's right, it's because you're not. It's it's you. If you're not, trying to be the quarterback, then it's your fault,
mm.
right? If you're not asking the girl out, it's your fault. If something happened, so that would be. I would have liked to have learned that sooner.
Mm.
I needed to learn that sooner.
Well, I think whenever you learned it, your life journey is definitely an inspiring one. So anyway, to everybody, I want to say I hope this conversation inspires you to think about your own why. How can you serve someone greater than yourself? And how each of us can play a role in moving forward with hope. So, thank you for listening to Moving Forward Conversations on Culture, Identity, Healing, and Hope. Be sure to subscribe, share this episode, and join me next time as we continue exploring stories that help us move forward together. Bye, Gus. Thank you so much.
Linda, it was my pleasure. Wonderful to see and talk with you, and thanks so much.